when God says, do not kill, do not kill. And I know that Christopher Hitchens, who is one of the most decent and moral of all American journalists, who is accredited as an expatriate from Britain having come here, I know that he really believes this and has absorbed it, because he is the only one to have gone against the grain of his own liberalism to challenge his core constituency, who so respect him, to come out in favor of the war in Iraq for one reason. Because he wrote such an eloquent piece on how Saddam gassed the Kurds in Halabja. A man who gasses people has no right to run a country, whatever other considerations. We Jews know what it's like to be gassed. And that man was the first to ever gas his own people. That is one of the 10 Commandments in action. There is no argument for the sanctity of life other than man is created in God's image. Everything else is quality of life. And once quality of life is gone, go to Dr. Kevorkian. In one of my debates with Dawkins, I said to him, we both knew, in the center of Oxford, there was a woman who would come every day to beg. She would defecate and she would pee. She was an eyesore on Carfax, the ancient Oxford city center where Christopher Hitchens studied as well. Balliol, right? Right near there. I said, well, why shouldn't we just kill her? Why shouldn't we kill her? I promise you, they had no good answer. In fact, if you don't believe me, Sir Francis Crick, who died July the 29th of this year, very sadly, won the Nobel Prize, as you know, for decoding the DNA molecule. He famously suggested at a British scientific conference that morality be redefined, beginning with birth. He wanted the birth of children to be redefined till 2 days after parturition, so that a baby could be examined for defects. And if the defects were determined to be sufficiently deleterious, the baby could be eliminated with impunity because it was not yet alive. Similarly, he proposed that death be redefined to the age of 85, at which a man will be declared legally dead, and he will be inherited by his children, and the man will be euthanized because after 85, people are no longer productive. Because for evolutionists, morality comes down to what is good for the species. It is not good for the species to invest resources into individuals that can no longer contribute to the species. They cannot procreate, they cannot work, etc. And then Christopher Hitchens says to us, we know so little about the world, that's true. The Zohar says, Tachas yediyah shelo nedoacha. The more we learn, the less we know. That's what the Oracle of Delphi told Socrates. He said he was the smartest man because he knew he didn't know. But rather than us not understanding the universe, the reason we know so little today, ladies and gentlemen, is because of its extraordinary complexity. Scientists are mind-boggled, dazzled by the extraordinary complexity of creation. And I wanted to bring some examples from a very recent popular science book by Bill Bryson called A Brief History of Everything. Sadly, I forgot it at home, and I therefore must rely on things that this book was published 10 years ago. This is science that's 10 years out of date. If the Earth were an inch closer or further from the sun, human life as we know it would be impossible, an inch. If it were not tilted on its axis 23 degrees, why is the Earth tilted on its axis, for God's sake? But if it were not, huge mountains of ice would pile up from the water vapor of the oceans. The Earth revolves at a speed of 1,000 miles per hour. If it were to revolve at only 100 miles per hour, night and day would increase 10 times in duration. Plants would be scorched in the day, seedlings would be frozen at night. If the moon were just a bit closer to the Earth, and we are the only planet that has a planet revolving, our moon is unique in the solar system, the size of our moon and its proximity to Earth, the tide would flood all lands, including the high mountains. If the oceans were deeper, carbon dioxide and oxygen would all be absorbed, and no plants could exist. Isaac Asimov wrote, in man, there was a 3-pound brain, which as far as we know is the most complex and orderly arrangement of matter in the universe. Now you might say this evolved through evolution. Let me read to you Thomas Huxley, and let's see who's being irrational. Let's see who's being irrational here. Here's Thomas Huxley writing about evolution. A proportion of favorable mutations, now you know that evolutionary doctrine says there is no God, and essentially, or it doesn't have to be a God, accidental mutations in the DNA code as they replicate themselves are what are responsible for the advances in the human organism. Here's Huxley. A proportion of favorable mutation of 1 in 1,000 does not sound like much, but it's probably generous. A total of 1 million mutational steps sound a great deal, but it's probably an understatement. With this proportion, we clearly have to breed 1 million strains. That's 1,000 squared to get one containing 2 favorable mutations and so on. 1,000 to the millionth power when written out. This is to get 3 favorable mutations. And to develop the human eye, you would need perhaps 10, 12 million favorable. Just to get 3, you would need, the figure becomes 1 with 3 million zeros after it. This is one of the greatest evolutionists of all time writing. And that would take 3 volumes of 500 pages each just to write. This is how he finishes the quote. No one got anything so improbable happening. And yet, miraculously, it has happened! Ta-da! The complexity of the universe is so impossible for us to fathom. And you know, so what evolution did is say, well, we have 14 billion years to work with. Folks, you can have 14 quadrillion years and you're never going to get the complexity of the human eye. They have never identified a single favorable mutation under laboratory conditions. Besides the Drosophila, they've taken a couple of moths and they've changed color, they weren't eaten by birds. That's it! It's evolutionists and scientists who are irrational. Transitional links. Darwin promised they would be found. We haven't found any of them. Evolution is largely a discredited theory. Don't believe me. Dawkins debated the late Professor Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard. I was there. In the Sheldonian Theater, which I'm sure Christopher remembers, at Oxford. And Gould came along and said, we got to be honest that evolution is done. We now have, but he wasn't a theist. We now have to go to the hopeful monster theory, the belief that there's great genetic leaps. This is a discredited theory, and it's based on pure faith. I challenge anyone here to name a favorable mutation, just one, and you would need tens of millions to produce the human eye. In conclusion, I want to read one thing to you and I'm done. The eyes, this is just from a biological textbook that I picked up and I quoted from it in my book. Oh, here, how about this? Some 12 million nerve endings will form in a baby's nose to help it detect fragrances or odors in the air. More than 100,000 nerve cells will be devoted to reacting to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony or the ticking of a Swiss watch. The piano has only 240 strings, but the baby's ears will have more than 240,000 hearing units to detect the smallest variation in sound. The baby's eyes, which begin to form at 19 days, will have more than 12 million screen points per square centimeter. The retina, or light-sensitive portion of its eye, will have more than 50 billion such points. We're talking about something which is infinitely, infinitely more complex than a plasma television. So to say that the argument from design is nonsense that should be ignored is an astonishing leap of faith. Thank you very much.
Yes, by all means, close to the mic. If I'm inaudible, please let me know. I am bound to say that it seems there's been a bit of a collapse of standards at my old university. It was actually at Oxford in the late 19th century where the first ever debate between evolution and creationism was held between Huxley and Bishop Wilberforce. Bishop Wilberforce was one of those who thought he knew actually how old the Earth was, so the Christians had a rather more primitive position. Then we're now living in at the point where you notice the religious no longer demand that only creationism be taught in school as they used to. They now demand equal time. It's another sign of their lack of confidence. But I feel I have to insist on a certain proposition. Reason has no dogma. Reason doesn't tell you have to believe anything. It says your mind must be open to reason. We know that evolution has occurred because we have the record of molecular biology, and it's in the fossil record. We cannot be certain how it occurred, and there certainly are major differences between Doctors Dawkins and Gould, as there were between both of them and Charles Darwin and the theory of natural selection. Natural selection is not the theory of evolution, it is a theory of evolution. If distinctions like this need to be made at this late date in a hall like this, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're in more trouble than I had suspected. Either that or that beer, which I notice is called the Chosen Ale, has had a better effect on the rabbi than it has on me. Now, just on a couple of clean-up points. The author of the Declaration of Independence is well known to have been one Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson had nothing but contempt, never expressed anything but contempt for the churches, for organized religion. He had a respect for faith, though none of his own, and a disbelief in the supernatural. And you can buy at any Unitarian bookstore to this day the Jefferson Bible, which is what he found was left if he took a pair of scissors and cut out everything in the Bible that could not, by any intelligent person, be believed. It makes for a slender, convenient read. I recommend it. To say that he is a votary of Genesis, I'm sorry, that's an insult. Not to me, but to you. It's not true.